Whoa, good morning, and welcome to some Civil War poetry. My name is Vincent Hannum, and this is my office in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Let's see who we got joining us right now. They'll come. They were here yesterday. We got up to 6 people watching live, which was very exciting. So, unfortunately, it just means they might miss our first game of the day. It is called Is the Coffee Hot? Whoa, there's no coffee this morning, folks. Didn't make it. But this is my Civil War mug. Little history about this little guy. I picked it up at the Anderson National Historic Site in Southwest Georgia. Um, yeah, like 9 years ago. So my favorite mug. Really hoping to break, especially on the program. Moving along, our second feature of the day is This Day in Civil War History. And this one I definitely wanted to share. It is from 1868. The 14th Amendment was ratified. And if you don't know, the amendment was designed to grant citizenship to and protect the civil liberties of recently freed slaves. It did this by prohibiting states from denying or abridging the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, depriving any person of his life, liberty, or property without due process of law, or denying to any person within their jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So obviously that was important on the heels of the 13th, which abolished slavery officially. And our Civil War quote from today is also by President Lincoln, just as yesterday. And he said, "You can have no conflict without being yourselves the aggressors." Wise words from a wise man. That was March 4th, 1861. So I always think that's a good transition. We do a quote, which gets us into a bit of the literature realm. Then we can move right on into the main feature of this program. That is poetry, of course. And reading from this book in particular, it is called Poetry of the Civil War. It's just a really neat collection of poems. It's divided in halves, one half being the blue, one half being the gray. The poems run anywhere from 1861, it's like right before the war, and even a few decades after the war. Still mainly in the 1800s, I believe. Just gives you a little context, what people were thinking, what writers were thinking, how people were processing this massive traumatic event in their lives, at least poetically. And by reading these, I hope to maybe better understand again what they were going through a 21st century lens, which I think is really hard to do sometimes. We get caught up in all the clamor of well, they did this, they meant that. Well, it's hard to say unless you go to the actual sources. This just happens to be some literature involved. But here we are, episode 8. And yesterday on episode 7, we read a couple poems, one by Herman Melville. You may have heard the writer of Moby Dick, which I am also reading, not coincidentally. Look, I'm more than halfway through. Woo! It's very good. Would recommend Moby Dick. But as for Melville himself, he was born in 1819, died in 1891, was born in New York City. His education was disrupted several times by bankruptcy and the death of his father. After finally leaving school, Melville found employment as a sailor and as a schoolteacher. His experience as the former served to inspire the majority of his novels, including Typee, 1846, Omoo, 1847, and Marty, 1849. Melville's early work was quite popular, but his audience quickly declined. Moby Dick, 1851, his masterpiece, considered by many to be the great American novel, was a commercial failure. Melville's first collection of poetry, Battle Pieces and Aspects of the War, Civil War Poems, 1866, sold fewer than 500 copies. In middle age, he turned to public speaking and for nearly 2 decades worked as a customs inspector for the city of New York. Wow. Just a regular guy writing books, and then he takes a customs job. Fascinating. Our Confederate poem yesterday was by an individual named Kate Brownlee Sherwood, a woman. Fantastic. She was born in 1841, died in 1914. Was born Catherine Brownlee in Poland, Ohio. She married during the war Isaac R. Sherwood, an officer of the Union Army and future United States congressman. A frequent contributor to various newspapers and magazines, she was known as the poetess of the Congressional Circle. Well, there's a reputation for you. And I will mention that her poem yesterday, it was called Albert Sidney Johnston, which ostensibly was about the revered Confederate general, Albert Sidney Johnston, who died at the Battle of Shiloh. So, Confederate. However, it had a very conciliatory tone and didn't wholly strike me as like pro-South, pro-Confederate, which was interesting. For those who are interested in reading these poems, I do try to copy and paste the text down below in the description. So you can go back to episode 7 tomorrow and read that one if you'd like. As well as today, you can follow along the 2 featured poems. And those are To Canaan, a song of the 600,000. That is our Union poem this morning. And it is by an old friend of the program, friend of the pod, Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. We featured another of his poems in episode 2, I want to say. So do check that one out. But here we go. This is To Canaan. Where are you going, soldiers, with banner, gun, and sword? We're marching south to Canaan to battle for the Lord. When Captain leads your armies along the rebel coasts, the mighty one of Israel, his name is Lord of hosts. To Canaan, the Lord has led us forth to blow before the heathen walls the trumpets of the north. What flag is this you carry along the sea and shore? The same our grandsires lifted up, the same our fathers bore. In many a battle's tempest, it shed the crimson rain. What God has woven in his loom, let no man rend in twain. To Canaan, the Lord has led us forth, to plant upon the rebel towers the banners of the north. What troops is this that follows, all armed with picks and spades? These are the swarthy bondsmen, the iron-skinned brigades. They'll pile up freedom's breastwork, they'll scoop out rebels' graves. Who then will be their owner and march them off for slaves? To Canaan, the Lord has led us forth, to strike upon the captain's chain the hammers of the north. What song is this you're singing? The same that Israel sung when Moses led the mighty choir and Miriam's timbrel rung. To Canaan, the priests and maidens cried. To Canaan, the people's voice replied. To Canaan, the Lord has led us forth to thunder through its adder dens the anthems of the north. When Canaan's hosts are scattered and all her walls lie flat, what follows next in order? The Lord will see to that. We'll break the tyrant's scepter, we'll build the people's throne. When half the world is freedom's, then all the world's our own. To Canaan, the Lord has led us forth to sweep the rebel threshing floors, a whirlwind from the north. Wow. That was from Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. And just my gut analysis is that unlike everything else we've read from the north, which has been typically very somber and poignant, this, I think, was the first rousing rally around the flag poem we've read, except maybe, episode 1 or 2. But I am super interested to know the Canaan reference, Canaan. I know it's biblical, obviously, but I'd like to figure that out. If you know, go ahead and share with us, share with the world, comment, and see what we got. Now, moving on to our Confederate poem, The Gray. This is called The Lone Sentry, and it is by James Ryder Randall. "'Twas in the dying of the day, the darkness grew so still, the drowsy pipe of evening birds was hushed upon the hill. Athwart the shadows of the vale slumbered the men of might, and one lone sentry paced his rounds to watch the camp that night. A grave and a solemn man was he, with deep and somber brow. The dreamful eyes seemed hoarding up some unaccomplished vow. The wistful glance peered o'er the plains beneath the starry light, and with the murmured name of God he watched the camp that night. The future opened unto him, its grand and awful scroll. Manassas and the valley march came heaving o'er his soul. Richmond and Sharpsburg thundered by with that tremendous fight, which gave him to the angel hosts who watched the camp that night. We mourn for him who died for us with one resistless moan, while up the valley of the Lord he marches to the throne. He kept the faith of men and saints, sublime and pure and bright. He sleeps, and all is well with him who watched the camp that night. Brothers, the midnight of the cause is shrouded in our fate. The demon Goths pollute our halls with fire and lust and hate. Be strong, be valiant, be assured. Strike home for heaven and right. The soul of Jackson stalks abroad and guards the camp tonight. That was a very I would say that's a very Confederate poem. The soul of Jackson. So clearly this was written after Stonewall Jackson died, invoking his name, invoking names of angels. Yeah, this one kind of reminds me of an earlier Union poem we read. Again, one of the earlier episodes, it was called All Quiet Along the Potomac by Ethel Lynn Beers. That one also dealt with a sentry kind of on his post, just feeling the dread of, the upcoming campaign, the upcoming terrors that he's going to face. So all right, the Confederacy is showing a bit of depth with their poetry. That they turns out they do have some poignancy to them. Well, that's what we got for today. I'll just give you a little sneak preview of what we got tomorrow. We have a poem by Emily Dickinson. All right. Featured her, another friend of the pod. And our Confederate poem tomorrow is by an author named... One second, folks. It is by Catherine M. Warfield. So we got a couple of poetesses coming up tomorrow. Again, my name is Vincent Hannum. This is some Civil War poetry. Like, comment, subscribe, get the word out there. I'm here live Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. But of course, you can catch this later on in the afternoon when it's all said and done. All right. Thanks a lot. Adios.